Hello, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Hillary Stevens. I'm here with the Restore America's Estuaries Coastal Resilience webinar series. We are very excited to welcome three speakers today to talk about transferable strategies for coastal resilience projects, best practices, and lessons learned. This is a great opportunity to learn about a variety of different projects, what worked well for them, maybe a few things that didn't, and hopefully these will be very applicable to your work. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're very happy to have you. Restore America's Estuaries is a national nonprofit organization. We're based in Washington, D.C. We're an alliance of 10 member groups that you see highlighted on the map here. We serve as an advocate for these organizations in D.C. and a convener for them and indeed for anyone working around the country to protect and restore their coastal resources. We have a number of different programs focusing on topics like living shorelines and blue carbon. We have a number of grant programs that we administer to fund restoration projects, and we host a variety of different types of events, including our biennial Coastal and Estuarine Summit, which will be coming up this December in New Orleans. We're very excited about this event. And we are still accepting submissions for posters. So if you are interested in presenting your work, your research, a case study of what you're working on, we would love to have you. Please go check out our website, has more information about how you can submit. In terms of upcoming news, the 27th, which is tomorrow, sorry for the alphabet soup. That's the National Estuary Program Coastal Watershed Grants Program. Those letters of intent are due tomorrow. Coming up next month, June 15th, our next webinar will feature the Galveston Bay Foundation. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Also coming up in mid-June, the registration for that summit will be going live. So just in the next couple of weeks, stay tuned. And again, that event is December 4th through the 8th in New Orleans. We are all over social media, so to keep abreast of everything that's happening, please check us out there. And without further ado and housekeeping, I will get right to it. Our speakers today are from ERG. We are very happy to have them. Our first speaker is Jennifer Lamb. She specializes in coastal resource management, stakeholder engagement, and project coordination. She led the team on this project to capture key information around lessons learned, challenges, and solutions. Ms. Lamb holds an MS in marine resource management from Oregon State. Our next speaker is Dr. Deanna Pietri. She brings an expertise in best practices for coastal resilience, adaptive management, and coastal management partnerships. For this project, she led interviews with coastal resilience practitioners to identify challenges, lessons learned, and transferable strategies. She holds a PhD in environmental and forest science and an MMA in marine and environmental affairs from the University of Washington. Our third speaker is Elizabeth Weathers. She specializes in researching climate change adaptation strategies and cities' efforts to combat sea level rise. She holds a bachelor's degree from Bowdoin College in Maine. And with that, I will be very happy to turn it over to our speakers. If you have any questions while they are presenting, please enter them in the question box. And after they are all three done, we will take those questions and pass them along. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, Hillary. All right. Just want to make sure everyone can see the slide.
Yes, it looks great. Go right ahead.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We are excited to tell you more about the Coastal Resilience Success Stories project that we developed for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Before we dive in, I do want to extend a big thank you to Restore America's Estuaries for giving us the opportunity to share our project today. So the presenters, Hillary already introduced all of us, so the three of us will be sharing some insights from our project today. So just as a quick overview, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, or NFWF, commissioned ERG to conduct a year-long project in 2021 to gather and share best practices from coastal resilience practitioners to enhance implementation of coastal resilience efforts in the United States. So the goals of this project were to, one, identify any challenges that coastal resilience practitioners face in planning for or implementing coastal resilience and natural and nature-based feature projects. We also looked to capture any lessons learned and strategies that these practitioners use to overcome some of these challenges. And then we also developed learning products, which in this case were case studies, to transfer knowledge and strategies among coastal resilience practitioners. So specifically, the case studies focused on restoration implementation projects funded through 2 of NFWF's programs. One was the Hurricane Sandy Coastal Resiliency Program, which is not actively funding new grants at this time, and also the National Coastal Resilience Fund, or NCRF. And specifically, NCRF was established in 2018, and the fund focuses specifically on nature-based solutions that enhance both community resilience to coastal hazards, as well as habitat for fish and wildlife. And the NCRF does release annual calls for proposals, and we've included a link to the webpage on the last slide of our presentation. So the 8 case studies we developed span across the US and territories and highlight coastal resilience projects in Hawaii, California, Louisiana, Ohio, Rhode Island, Maryland, North Carolina, and Puerto Rico. So our team reviewed over 100 documents that included grant reports, proposals, and peer-reviewed literature, and also conducted interviews with 60 resilience practitioners to gather data to inform this project. So collectively, the research showed that resilience practitioners face many challenges in getting projects designed and successfully implemented. And some of those key challenges include policy constraints, rigid regulatory frameworks, organizational barriers such as limited staff capacity to undertake the projects, as well as data and knowledge gaps related to site conditions, climate projections, and other topics. However, in analyzing the approaches that these practitioners use to overcome some of these challenges, there were kind of 3 main solution categories that were key elements of successful projects. The first one, adaptive management, and using adaptive management approaches that often help practitioners manage project uncertainties and reduce risk in the face of changing environmental, social, and political conditions. The second solution category was around partnerships, and practitioners had highlighted that partnerships are very essential in helping them navigate the complex landscape surrounding resilience projects and also helping them foster productive relationships with team members, partner organizations, and regulators. And then the third category was around outreach and engagement, and using these strategies that ensuring that they are effective, accessible, and inclusive so that practitioners can strengthen outreach to and collaboration with the public to build goodwill and community support for project implementation. So kind of at a high level, we pulled together overarching transferable strategies in those 3 categories. So for adaptive management, one of the overarching strategies practitioners highlighted was using an adaptive management approach from the project onset. So designing a process that allows for learning and adaptation, as well as educating partners early on about the benefits of adaptive management and getting their buy-in from the beginning. The second strategy under adaptive management was engaging the project team and the whole team, including partners, in adaptive management. So empowering team members and partners to respond, move forward, and adapt their project approaches following any unforeseen circumstances or delays. And then the last strategy in this category is proactively designing cost-effective, project-appropriate monitoring approaches. So thinking about and considering low-cost options such as visual site assessments, but also exploring more robust protocols if budget allows. So that could include shoreline transects and sand gauges. Under the partnership area, we have these 2 overarching transferable strategies. One was around forming diverse interdisciplinary project teams. So being able to collaborate with a wide range of experts who have the skills needed to ensure project success, but also identifying team members with complementary skill sets to kind of build that holistic team. And then also being able to define leadership and other roles and responsibilities for all the participants at the beginning. And then the second strategy is around building partnerships with community members. So tapping that community knowledge to inform project design and implementation, and also enlisting those on the ground community organizations and volunteers to help construct and design projects in the field. And then another bit of insights from practitioners was they highlighted cultivating local champions to advocate for the project and help increase support, and educating the community was really helpful. And then in the third category of outreach and engagement, overarching transferable strategies include encouraging the community involvement during all project phases. So figuring out and learning at the beginning what the community needs and concerns are from the project start was critical, and also looking for ways to apply that community knowledge during the whole project process. The second strategy was using multiple communication methods to connect with communities. So being able to tailor your approaches to accommodate the ways that people prefer to get information, and considering different multimedia communication approaches such as videos, signage, community town halls, virtual meetings, and social media posts, and then also being able to translate information for non-English speaking communities. And then the last strategy here is thinking outside of the box. So using more interactive virtual and in-person outreach methods, such as site visits, walking tours, participatory modeling, and scavenger hunts were some of the options and approaches that practitioners used. So we developed content for a NFWF web portal, which is linked on this slide, as well as at the end of our presentation. And it included multimedia content on these three solution categories. And each of these solution category pages, we've included an interactive explainer, which I'll show you more on the next slide. Included on this web portal, you'll also find the 8 thematic case studies profiling NFWF funded coastal resilience projects. And each of these case studies includes a project overview, challenges and solutions that they experienced, and also specific project-specific transferable strategies. They also include multimedia, so team interviews, we did some podcasts, project overview videos, and some story maps. And then also on the case study page, there's the web-based format, but there's a link that you can print the PDF version of the case study. So here you will see an example of an interactive explainer that we developed for the adaptive management category. The web portal has an explainer again for each of the 3 solution categories. And this explainer acts kind of as an introduction to all the case studies and highlights common project challenges, introduces the theme of adaptive management and its relevance to coastal resilience projects, and also provides the specific examples of how grantees have used transferable strategies in different ways. And then on the very end of the explainer, and what you see on the slide here, are links to the specific case studies, and in this case, that implemented adaptive management strategies as a key component to the success of their project. So we definitely recommend everyone to go check out the web portal on the NFWF website and check out these explainers and these case studies. So now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Elizabeth, who will showcase the first set of our case studies.
Great, thank you, Jen. So following up on that adaptive management explainer, we are going to highlight the 3 case studies on projects that used adaptive management in their approach, whether that was planning or implementing the projects. So we start with American Rivers, the California State Coastal Conservancy, and then the Nature Conservancy. So diving into Maryland dam removal, the nonprofit group American Rivers increased community and ecological resilience by successfully removing a dam on Maryland's Patapsco River in 2018. The dam had been out of use for quite a while, and it had actually become a bit of a hazard for recreators in the area, and of course had also disrupted the river's natural flow and native fish spawning habitat. Thankfully, American Rivers was successfully able to remove the dam, and their adaptive management plan allowed the team to plan for and respond to potential setbacks that arose during the removal and restoration. So some challenges included permitters' concerns about a proposed minimal intervention restoration design. So of course, removing a dam is quite a level of intervention, but then they proposed to allow the river to kind of restore itself after the dam was removed. And American Rivers was able to assuage some permitters' concerns by using their adaptive management approach and demonstrating how they were planning to respond to some potential risks by using monitoring and sediment transport modeling in their approach. So they also brought in experts to analyze potential impacts and compare benefits of these different approaches, such as a heavily engineered approach versus a minimal intervention design. The ongoing monitoring and modeling helped to illustrate benefits of the approach and also helped the team adapt to the changing conditions, lessen long-term project costs, and contribute to more enduring project outcomes. Additionally, because American Rivers had conducted similar projects in the past, they were able to build on previous long-term monitoring efforts from other dam removal projects. And also the predictive sediment transport modeling helped illustrate and contextualize the relatively low risks associated with removing the dam. And just a plug for the website here, in the full case study write-up online, we've also included some links to videos and additional documents that American Rivers produced. And we'd encourage people to check those out in addition to the full case study to learn more. So now we fly west to the San Francisco Bay, where a team of nonprofit organizations and government agencies led by the California State Coastal Conservancy developed preliminary designs for a gravel beach and berm structure that is intended to protect critical habitat, control erosion, and enhance shoreline resilience in the Eden Landing Ecological Reserve in the South San Francisco Bay. And the Eden Landing Ecological Reserve is the site of some former salt ponds. And so there's quite a large restoration project going on there. And so this was just a little piece of it. So the gravel beach and berm is a 300-foot long pilot project designed to protect existing levees from erosion while stabilizing the shoreline and providing multiple ecosystem services. Outcomes from the pilot project will also inform implementation of a 1 mile gravel beach and berm feature at the same location. And both the pilot project and the full project will serve as a model for similar projects along the San Francisco Bay shoreline. So as part of the project plans and designs, the team developed an adaptive management plan, which included pre and post-project monitoring. And the pre-project monitoring was critical to ground truthing some of the model outputs that California State Coastal Conservancy had developed, and it also informed the actual site selection, of course. So some of the initial modeling had indicated that the proposed site would be on highly compressible soil, which could cause the beach and berm structure to fail over time. However, the on-the-ground monitoring and ground truthing showed that the proposed site would actually be able to support the structure later on. So the team had also developed multiple versions of the structure to be sure that they landed on the most effective design for the larger project. And also because the project proposed to place sediment in San Francisco Bay waters, which is prohibited under some state and federal regulations, the team worked very closely with regulators to obtain the necessary permits, and involving regulators early and often really helped the State Coastal Conservancy move through that tricky permitting situation. So now flying even further west to Hawaii, we are in the Hai'ea wetlands on the eastern coast of Oahu, where the Nature Conservancy is partnering with local community members and community groups to restore the Hai'ea wetlands. The project aims to restore over 400 acres of wetlands, promote traditional Hawaiian agricultural practices, and increase food security. Restoring this area also will improve habitat conditions and environmental and community resilience, in addition to generating food and clean water for the surrounding community. So the team also designed a monitoring protocol, as did the others who implemented these adaptive management approaches. So the difference with the Nature Conservancy's approach was that the monitoring protocol is to be implemented during this ongoing restoration, which is a little bit tricky. And it ended up being very helpful in the end, of course, and designing this project-specific monitoring protocol at the project outset is a critical step in adaptive management. And the monitoring results of this project have served as a really great communication tool, and sharing the results of this ongoing monitoring has helped build support for the project. The initial monitoring results have also helped assuage some stakeholders' concerns that the restoration efforts might negatively impact water quality in the fish pond or the bay below the project site. And the effectiveness of this project and the strength of the partnerships developed have garnered national attention. And in 2017, NOAA named Haiea a National Estuarine Research Reserve, which brings additional interest, leadership, and funding support for the project. So this project is ongoing, and the case study we developed also has some additional links to a TNC produced video and additional information about the project. So again, I encourage you all to check out the website. And now I will pass it over to our colleague Deanna to finish up the case studies.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. So we are now going to shift a little bit. The case studies that Elizabeth was sharing with you on adaptive management are all very implementation focused. However, a lot of the projects that we looked at were also focused more on the planning stages. And so these case studies on partnerships, which are on the East Coast and North Carolina and Rhode Island, are really focused on the planning that's needed and how to form valuable partnerships to engage in planning that's needed to get coastal restoration projects ready, shovel ready, essentially, to be ready to implement. So beginning in North Carolina, this was the Overcoming Local Barriers to Implementation and Getting Ready to Shovel Readiness project led by the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. And so for this project, what they were really trying to do is they were trying to address a lack of capacity that many coastal municipalities have to engage in planning, designing, and implementing nature-based solutions that could reduce their vulnerability. And of course, these coastal municipalities in North Carolina, they would like to reduce their vulnerability to climate change and other risks because they are really on the front lines of many of the impacts of storm surges, of sea level rise, of everything that's really battering the North Carolina coast. And so thus, the Department of Environmental Quality formed the Resilient Coastal Communities Program. And this program really provides an opportunity for these coastal municipalities to engage in a process. It's a 4-phase process, and it lets them plan for and then eventually implement coastal resilience projects. And really, this key goal is to provide a prioritized portfolio of shovel-ready resilience projects that these municipalities have everything lined up so that they can then implement and undertake these projects. And so in terms of what they did, this was a very interesting project in that the organizations and were partnering on it had a very clear vision of what they wanted to do, but it was also difficult to get support for it and to think about how to involve the coastal municipalities. Should this be a mandated program that coastal municipalities should have to do? Is that something that would be successful? And what they decided is that really having a mandated program was not likely to achieve the successes that they wanted it to. And so instead, they developed an incentive-based approach where they provided incentives for these local governments to get involved by things like providing technical assistance and helping link these local municipalities to the qualified contractors that they needed to get engineering assistance for permitting and technical design and whatnot. And they found that that was really a successful thing to have these voluntary incentives. And one of the ways that they were able to think about what could be successful, voluntary incentives versus mandates, was by drawing on proven frameworks and successes of other states. So there are some other states and even national programs that have engaged in similar efforts, like the National Naturally Resilient Communities project, as well as Massachusetts Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program and the Florida Resilient Coastlines Program. And so the individuals and partners working on this in North Carolina, they were able to look at some of the lessons learned from these previous projects, as well as talk with some of the coastal practitioners from these other states and think about what were the solutions that were really things that they could apply within North Carolina. They also, in having these linkages between the technical practitioners and the coastal communities, they really helped generate demand for nature-based solution expertise. So they found that while a lot of coastal communities lacked the capacity that they needed, they also found that there were some of the technical contractors who were not as familiar with nature-based solutions. And so there was an opportunity to be training these technical contractors in nature-based solutions approaches. And in doing so, really creating a demand for engineers, more engineers and experts who were skilled in these topics, and then could be linked directly with the coastal municipalities. So it was really creating a demand kind of in both ways from the coastal municipalities as well as for the technical experts. And so then in the end, this really resulted in having this prioritized portfolio of shovel-ready projects that are able to help these coastal communities compete for and leverage federal and state implementation funds. And so in having these, the coastal municipalities and the state, when funding opportunities are available, they are now able to pursue these and have projects that can say, you know, we have engineering designs, we're ready for permits, we're ready to go. This is what needs to be funded. So moving along, from North Carolina, moving just a little bit northward, this project in Rhode Island, which was led by the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council and was focused on, it was called the Shoreline Adaptation for Resilience and Habitat Enhancement Project Inventory, was actually taking a very similar approach. So in Rhode Island, as in many other states, as in North Carolina, you know, these municipalities are on the front lines when they're dealing with the effects of climate change. And in Rhode Island, they found, much like in North Carolina, that these coastal municipalities really needed support to identify, prioritize, obtain funding for, and implement adaptation and resilience projects. So CRMC and its partners thus launched the Shoreline Adaptation Inventory and Design Program. And they used a highly collaborative process to develop what ended up being a statewide spatial repository of adaptation projects to address the impacts of coastal storms, sea level rise, stormwater, and other risks. And so, like North Carolina, this inventory really provides Rhode Island's 21 coastal municipalities with a pipeline of potential projects. And so as of 2021, the inventory actually had over 240 projects, and folks are still able to nominate potential projects that could be included in this inventory. And thus far, coming out of this inventory, there are actually somewhere around 9 projects that have been implemented and were able to become shovel ready and go through this whole process. So then, in terms of some of the factors that the challenges that they encountered, they really found that, you know, they were trying to work with all of these different coastal communities and thinking about ways that they needed to foster efficient collaboration among all of the coastal communities and technical experts to undergo this project and to prioritize the different coastal projects that they wanted to put into the pipeline. And so what was really helpful for this project was having CRMC serve as this lead organization who was able to establish clear goals for the project and clear goals for each of the organizations and identify their roles. And so they had many meetings with municipal staff and decision makers to decide on what these roles would be. And then they really worked to identify complementary roles for partners, everybody who was working on the project. So CRMC was serving in this coordination and facilitation role that included administering a competitive bid process to hire some engineering firms. They then helped facilitate the discussions with municipalities and the engineering firm and kind of lead some of the project implementation. And then some of the other project partners, such as Save the Bay and the University of Rhode Island Coastal Resources Center, then work directly with municipalities to engage communities, create cohesive project goals, and think about how to value the needs of communities in this prioritization process. And so they were also, thinking about ways within this to leverage resources to help build local capacity. And as part of that, they were really working with local communities to understand what their local priorities were. And so thinking about, sometimes there were competing interests between communities for projects they wanted and different uses for the coastline, but they were able to think about potential co-benefit projects and how to balance out some of these competing interests to help ensure that the communities were on board and happy with the projects that were being selected. And then they also worked to help stakeholders visualize solutions. So they conducted visits to potential project sites and also provided some interactive visualizations of coastal hazards that were really quite helpful in engaging with residents and gaining community support as they helped the coastal residents really visualize what some of these impacts from climate change could be, as well as what some of the changes that these projects, if they were to be implemented in the future, could achieve. And so again, that project is not ongoing, but there is still the ability to nominate sites for inclusion in the repository. And if you go to our website, you can see more about the case study itself. And then there are links to, for instance, the spatial repository that are really useful. And then just closing the loop on the other partnership case study as well, too, on the website for the North Carolina case study, there's actually a very interesting podcast with one of the agency representatives regarding the process that they used in their process to develop this similar inventory of shovel-ready projects. So we really encourage everybody to check out the website if they want to learn more. So now, shifting gears slightly, we are going to go to a series of case studies focused on outreach and engagement. And so the case studies for partnership that we just talked about, there are obviously a lot of components of outreach and engagement in those case studies, but they were also focused on partnerships that were occurring between state agencies and local agencies and nonprofit and state and community partners and whatnot. And outreach and engagement, these case studies are really focused quite strongly on how different organizations really reached out to local communities and shared information with them and got them on board and collaborated with them to demonstrate project benefits and help identify project needs and priorities for local communities. And so we have 3 case studies that we will highlight from throughout the US, from the Great Lakes to the Caribbean and then down to the Gulf. And so we are going to start with the Great Lakes in Cleveland with the Cleveland Harbor Eastern Embayment Resilience Study, also known quite cleverly with one of my favorite acronyms as the CHEERS study. And so this was led by Cleveland Metro Parks, and they were working on the eastern embayment of the Cleveland Harbor in Lake Erie. And this is an area where land use and industry have really degraded the eastern embayment, and they have diminished in water and nearshore habitat. And so these changes have really increased the vulnerability of the surrounding communities to environmental and climate impacts, things like more intense storm events and shoreline erosion. And also, Cleveland's east side communities are particularly vulnerable. These are communities with high poverty levels, many minority and immigrant populations. And so compounding some of their existing vulnerabilities, these additional climate vulnerabilities really put these communities at great risk. And so CHEERS was really focused on completing this study and planning process that would apply nature-based solutions to improve the resilience of Lake Erie's shorefront. And so this study was really focused on thinking about how to improve resilience while also connecting people to the lake, protecting infrastructure and natural habitat, and celebrating the cultural significance and history of the lake. So they really wanted to have this strong community component to this project and ultimately, they wanted the study to identify nature-based solutions, including beneficial use of dredge sediments from the Cuyahoga River. So in implementing this study, it was really quite complex and required a lot of multi-partner collaboration. There were many different groups that they were working with, from local communities to various agencies to community development corporations and others. And so that they found, for really having effective multi-partner collaboration, they were able to use both virtual and in-person mechanisms to do things like workshops and have coordinating committee meetings and ensure that everybody was really clear on their roles and was able to have meaningful engagement and provide useful feedback. And so they had a series. If you go to the website, we then link to the CHEERS study. And if you look at the CHEERS study, you can see that there were many different coordinating teams that they had, and each of the coordinating teams had a clear role and a series of meetings and a lead. And so they really established this very clear collaborative mechanisms. And then they also engaged community-based organizations. They worked specifically with 4 local community development corporations throughout all stages of the CHEERS process. And these CDCs, as they're called, really helped advocate for and identify the communities and protect their interest, while also thinking about how to balance habitat and ecosystem protection goals. And of course, they were looking at how to use a wide array of accessible outreach tools to engage these diverse communities, but this was really quite challenging, and they had to pivot a lot because the CHEERS study started right at the beginning of 2020 with the pandemic. So they had a lot of really valuable in-person communication, engagement, and coordination planned. And of course, they had to change that drastically to come up with lots of different virtual outreach strategies. And so they did come up with a great suite of virtual and some in-person and socially distanced engagement options. And so first, they helped communities connect to the environment through things like walkshops. They had these socially distant walkshops where folks could come and be masked and socially distant, and they would lead tours of the site and explain some of the environmental conditions and then some of the things that were being planned in the projects. They also then had virtual scavenger hunts. So if folks were not comfortable going to these workshops, they could go online, they could look up a virtual scavenger hunt, and they could then take themselves to the lake and look for some of these characteristics about the lake and learn more facts about it. They also had multiple virtual engagement meetings with a variety of stakeholders. And then they really work to ensure that the accessibility of outreach materials that they use for more indirect engagement. So signage around the lake, materials that could be distributed at events, at community centers and whatnot. And all of those materials, were in multiple languages to reflect the linguistic diversity of the various communities that were in the area. And so they really had a lot of great things they were doing. They were really focused on equitable outcomes and thinking about the vulnerable nature of these communities. And so if you want to hear more about this, I encourage you to go to the website, because we have a podcast with some of the members of the CHEERS team who do a really great job of explaining what they were doing and kind of the values that underpinned their study. And then, of course, we have links to the Cleveland Metro Parks website and the CHEERS study itself, which provide a lot of great additional details. So moving along from Cleveland, going to more tropical environments, this project was the Strengthening Resilience Through the Ecological Restoration of Puerto Rico Coastal Sand Dunes, and it was led by Vida Marina at the University of Puerto Rico Aguadilla. And this project was focused on sand dune restoration for ravaged sand dunes that had really been degraded over many years through environmental hazards and conditions, sea level rise, erosion, storm surge, hurricanes, and whatnot, as well as illegal behavior and use by citizens in the past. So illegal and legal sand extraction, people walking and driving on the sand dunes, all of these had really led to a really degraded sand dune ecosystem that thus decreased the resilience of the shoreline. And so a team of students and researchers from Vida Marina worked to restore ravaged sand dunes through the creation of biomimicry matrices, which are structures that will help stabilize the dunes and promote uniform sand accumulation, and also protect new dune plantings. And if you want to see more of these biomimicry matrices on the website, we actually have a video about this project, and includes some really great pictures and some embedded videos about the biomimicry matrices and what they look like and how they were installed. They're really quite neat. So definitely go and check those out. And so beyond the biomimicry matrices, the team is also installing wooden boardwalks at critical beach access points. And then they conducted many outreach workshops and environmental education programs, which have really played a critical role in enlisting volunteers. And so, of course, when they were undergoing this project, it was not without its challenges. They had a lot of problems getting permits. They were working to get permits from the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources, and this department, DNR, really was stressed at the time that they were doing the study from hurricanes Irma and Maria. They were overworked. There was a lack of staff. There had been a lot of staff turnover. All of this made it really hard to get the permits that the team needed. But the Vida Marina team found that by testing some novel approaches at other sites where they had already received permits and using similar approaches, they were able to use long-term monitoring to demonstrate the success of the approaches that they had taken. And they were able to demonstrate and publicize the effectiveness of these previous projects that had used similar approaches through doing things like site visits to the other project sites, promoting it on social media, even using traditional media to raise the visibility of these projects. And so all of this really helped gain support from the community, but also from the regulators for the project, and allowed them to eventually get the permits that they needed to implement the project. Then they also worked really hard to involve local communities. I mentioned that there was a history of some illegal and legal sand extraction, and then also of pedestrian traffic on the dunes and vehicle traffic on the dunes as well too. So they really wanted to work to overcome some of these perceptions that the community had held about what was permissible on the dunes, and show them that no, these practices are really harming the dunes, and this is how we can help them. And so to do that, they involved citizens and local school groups in restoration activities, and really helped create a broad volunteer base of local community members who wanted to participate. And they also directly involved some of the schools and educators, and so that the schools were working on this through volunteer days. There were workshops, trainings, and then a lot of social media and regular media coverage. And all of this helped promote the project and helped implement the project, and it was really a great success. And again, on the website there's a lot of great information about it and some pictures about what the site looks like now. So then we'll move along for our final case study. We are going to go to the Gulf, to the Louisiana, to the Port Fourchon area for a project that was about supporting resiliency of an evolving coast, and led by the Water Institute of the Gulf. So in 2016, in this region, the Greater Lafourche Port Commission had announced plans to obtain federal regulatory approval to deepen the port. And they wanted to do this to support the needs of a growing offshore energy industry. And so they also wanted to, however, identify nature-based uses for dredged material. So the Port Commission formed a public-private partnership known as the Partnership for Our Working Coast. And this was led by the Water Institute of the Gulf. And they led partnership and collaboration with industry partners, including Chevron, Shell, and Danos. And the Institute really worked to think about how to conduct extensive outreach and education with community stakeholders to figure out how they could reuse the dredge materials to protect critical infrastructure, enhance community and habitat resilience, and improve carbon capture and sequestration. And so, this was a challenging project for many reasons, one of which some of the stakeholders, because of industry involvement and because of some of the inherent uncertainties in kind of the models and the approaches being taken, were rather distrustful of the project. So what they did is they really worked to engage stakeholders in project design and in project planning, and allowed them to express their needs and concerns by doing things like using participatory modeling exercises. And so they did participatory modeling and mapping and used this as an engagement tool with stakeholders that allowed different groups, including nonprofits, small businesses, educational institutions, and more, engage in exercises where they could they could help visualize the effects of future climate scenarios and think about how reusing this dredged materials could increase resilience. And so they also did this they also helped work with these stakeholders by conducting site visits. Of course, some of these site visits, this is also going on at the start of the pandemic, so they had to pivot from what were planned as fully in-person site visits to doing some virtual site visits with stakeholders and using socially distanced approaches when feasible. And so they did this with stakeholders to really, again, show them the sites and think about help them visualize the impacts of both climate change and then the resilience benefits of these projects. And then they also established a lot of online platforms for engagement, particularly given the need for all of this virtual engagement with the pandemic. And they really were able to, by doing some of this participatory modeling and having these collaborative platforms, draw heavily on local knowledge and collect and reflect that in some of the designs and alternatives that they were pursuing. So that brings us to the end of our case studies and our presentation for today. We've listed up here these resources. You can view the explainers and case studies on the NFWF website. And then on the website, you can also learn more about opportunities for future funding through the National Coastal Resilience Fund. And then finally, on the website, all of the case studies have project team contact information and links to the implementing organization's web pages. So we really encourage you to reach out to the organizations and to the folks who were the key contacts for these case studies if you want to learn more, because they were heavily involved with us in developing these case studies, and we're really excited to share them and think about how others could learn from these case studies. So we really appreciate you all taking the time to listen to this presentation today. And now we have time for questions.
All right, Deanna, I want to thank you so much for all of that information. This has been extremely helpful. You've covered a really wide geographic range, which I know is very important to our audience. We've been working on an Inclusive Coasts initiative, looking at grant programs and best practices of how to best implement grant programs. And you've addressed a lot of the issues that have come up there about making information available to potential grantees so they can learn from other folks that have had successes. So this is really, there's just a ton of information here. This is really helpful. The questions are coming in, and the first one I'm going to start off with is, this is very interesting. What is the metric of success for outreach? It's not clear how you determine that outreach to a diverse array of stakeholders was effective, especially regarding nature-based projects that may appeal to a relatively small subset. So I would shoot that to you, Deanna, although I see the others of you nodding. If you want to jump in, go right ahead.
Yes, so that is a really great question, and one that we have been talking about as part of many different projects, including this one about metrics for outreach. And so in terms of how we were determining success here, in doing this project, we were really drawing heavily on qualitative information. So really in-depth interviews, key informant interviews with grantees, with practitioners, and based on, and with both partners and the grantees themselves. And so hearing these stories and reading reports and looking at that and drawing on that rich qualitative information to think about what were some of these outcomes, and how was the community engaged? What did it result in? What did it look like in terms of how communities were getting involved in the work and the stories that they were sharing about their experiences and their perceptions? There are, of course, simple metrics that folks sometimes try to use as a proxy for thinking about outreach. There's always the number of meetings held and number of participants engaged. And those are, definitely something that helps give an idea of whether there was outreach at all and whether there were indirect or direct outreach strategies used. But really, from this project and from others, we found it's really that qualitative information on outreach outcomes and kind of trying to follow those threads in terms of seeing what happens at the project, what happens after, trying to understand what types of changes in knowledge, attitudes, and perceptions there were to really think about how effective outreach is. Jen or Elizabeth, anything you would add there?
Yeah, I would just add on that. I mean, when we think about metrics, some people are like very quantitative and thinking about number of meetings held or number of partners involved, but like really what does that tell us and what impact did that really have? Did the engagement have? So thinking about how to better assess either knowledge change, behavior change. So thinking about even through all these different outreach and engagement meetings and workshops and walkshops, doing something like a pre-survey, post-survey with participants to figure out, has their knowledge or awareness changed over the course of the project engagement opportunities. That's another good way to measure success.
All right, thank you. Yes, that is absolutely a challenging and somewhat slippery topic to try and get your hands around, and absolutely agree that there's got to be a balance somewhere between the quantitative and the qualitative. We do have a lot of questions coming in about folks wanting more information. I think there's a lot of thirst for details on this about when you drop something like a scavenger hunt, everybody wants to know more about what exactly is that and what does it look like. So I will direct everybody's attention to the chat where they have helpfully added links to these case studies and where you can find more information and contact info for the organizations in question. Let's see, next question. I'd love to hear more about the outside the box engagement strategies mentioned by Jennifer. I heard site visits, walking tours, but I think missed one or two in like a little more detail. If you have anything you could sort of add to what you said previously.
Yeah, at a high level, we kind of highlighted the additional engagement outside the box approaches. And I think Deanna in her highlight of the outreach and engagement case studies highlighted again, walkshops, which I never even heard of that term until after the pandemic. We've developed podcasts, interviews, and scavenger hunts. Deanna highlighted kind of the virtual scavenger hunts. If people didn't want to go in person for any of the walkshops or in-person site visits, they could still get engaged through virtually and still be able to see the site and engage with the site through a virtual scavenger hunt. I don't know, Deanna, were there other?
Yeah, I think a lot of the workshops and the virtual scavenger hunts, and then, I mean, I think some of the engagement strategies were perhaps not so much outside of the box in terms of things that people have never done before, but in thinking about how to apply them and virtually in these environments, some of the, and in Puerto Rico, for instance, some of the things that Vida Marina was using in terms of thinking about how to do outreach to local media organizations and raise the visibility of their project to kind of think about how that could help, get support for it, even from regulatory agencies and whatnot, things that we're really, really thinking about what are all these different tools that are available to us and how can we use them, how can we use students and youth to get engaged in the project and help implement it, but then also help pass the message on of the beneficial environmental practices coming from these projects, to their families and whatnot, and just kind of all these different ways that you can change behavior. I think a lot of these examples are showing a great array of that.
And I appreciate also you're addressing some of the very specific challenges we're seeing in the last couple of years. Obviously, the pandemic has made outreach a completely different game, but also the short staff or lower capacity as a result, you mentioned in Puerto Rico as a result of the storms, but I think the current hiring climate and the financial state of a lot of government and municipal entities has meant that they are really backlogged And those are challenges that are going to continue to plague any project that requires a permitting process. So I really appreciate you mentioning those as well, and the need to maybe get creative and think differently about how to approach those issues. Let's see, next question. What methods did you use to identify the transferable strategies, and how did you decide what types of learning products to develop?
Yeah, that is a great question. So also on the website, if you go to the landing page, which Jen has linked in the chat, there is more of an overview of the project and kind of what we did. And so it describes some of our methods, but we were conducting interviews with practitioners. So we interviewed somewhere around 60 coastal resilience practitioners, which included NFWF grantees as well as those beyond NFWF. And we also reviewed over 100 documents, including grant documents and other just general coastal resilience related white papers and academic articles and whatnot. And then we were also reviewing existing learning products, that existing platforms that had information about coastal resilience, and some of it, best practices, success stories and whatnot. And so through all of that, we were able to identify what are some of the main challenges that are coming up when we're doing this. So we were doing qualitative coding, inductive and deductive approaches to identify, okay, here are some themes we were expecting to see, like permitting, but here are some emerging themes about challenges. And so doing that based on the interviews and the document review, and then looking at, and then what are the strategies that folks were using to overcome these challenges when they're being discussed using the same methods. And so we also then in interviews were asking our interviewees about what gaps do you have in terms of learning products? What do you want to see in a learning product? And that is how we ended up developing the case studies, because we really saw a desire for folks to want specific information about a project so that they could really dig in, and from a diversity of locations, because, we definitely heard from some individuals saying, well, I'm in an island territory and it doesn't really resonate with me, unless it's another island situation or the Great Lakes or something like that. And so they were wanting specifics, but also depth and in terms of what was available. And so that is how we identified the transferable strategies and then put them into the form of case studies on these websites. And then also with a lot of different options for how to view the case studies. So if you want a high level overview, you can go to just look through, scroll on the website or and then if you want more specific information, there's a lot of links to multimedia resources, to more in-depth information. So it really has these different levels that allow folks to dig in to the degree that they want to, which is something else that we heard about quite a bit, about wanting kind of these different options.
Thank you. I was going to throw out, someone had asked about sediment transport modeling, and I appreciate that. Looks like Elizabeth put some info there in the chat, so I will direct anyone interested in sediment modeling to check out the chat. One final question here, and I think we are at time. Did you see any examples of true project co-development? So not just engaging communities, but working with them as equal partners and having community leads as co-PIs to drive the process?
We definitely did. I would cite, if anyone is interested in learning more about that, I think the Nature Conservancy project in Hawaii and the Ha'aia wetlands is a really great example. They were collaborating very closely with a lot of community organizations who were really active in the community and had worked for many generations to represent the local cultures and the needs, and were skilled in some of the traditional management practices that had been occurring in those wetlands. And so TNC was the grantee for the NFWF project because they have the capacity to be the grantee, but they were really, their local partners were incredibly involved, and they were really co-leading the project with each other to really identify what those practices they should use could be. And because the project is focused so much on restoring ecological capacity, but using traditional practices to do so. So that was that's one that really stands out to me as a good example there.
That's great. Thank you. I will definitely be reading up on that, and I suggest everyone else dive in as well. With that, we are at the top of the hour, so I think I'm going to hold it there. Thank you so much for all of your time and shared expertise. We've got our homework cut out for us to dive in and read all of these case studies. I know I'm looking forward to it. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Remind you, our next webinar is queued up, I believe it's June 15th. We'll have someone from Galveston Bay Foundation coming to talk about work they've been doing in the Western Gulf of Mexico. And keep your eyes open. The registration site for our summit will be going live in just a couple of weeks. So again, I want to thank you, Jen, Deanna, and Elizabeth, for your time today. And this recording will go up on our YouTube channel with a link from our website within a couple of days. So thanks everyone again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Bye, thanks.